Money is not actually a physical asset. It is merely a collective belief, the unshakable trust you have that the numbers in your bank account will be there when you wake up in the morning, and that the pieces of paper in your pocket have value, is the cornerstone of modern civilization. However, history is filled with stories of how this trust can turn to dust in a single day. Today, let's put aside our illusions about the system functioning perfectly and take a journey into the dark corridors of financial history, to those moments when the great collapses occurred. As we embark on this journey, we must ask ourselves, why does an economy collapse? The answer usually lies not in the numbers, but in the dark corners of human nature. Everything began in 1634, in the Netherlands, with a simple tulip bulb. How could a tulip possibly be worth an artisan's annual earnings? People sold their homes, their lands, and their future inheritances, investing everything in these flowers just because they expected them to rise in value. Back then, in the taverns of Amsterdam, people were trading not just tulip bulbs, but their futures that hadn't even emerged from the soil yet. Let's take Jan van Goyen, a famous painter of the era. Van Goyen was not just an artist, but an investor caught up in Tulip Mania. He spent everything he had on a rare Semper Augustus bulb. He imagined it would earn him a mansion one day. Days passed, the tulip bloomed, but in the meantime, the market crashed. One morning, when he woke up, the flower bulb in his hand was nothing more than a rotting piece of vegetation. Van Goyen had to pay off debts for the rest of his life. This was not just a trade. It was a social hysteria. When the bubble burst, people were left holding nothing but worthless bulbs. The silence that fell over the streets of the Netherlands that day was, in fact, the first great cry of financial history, where human greed knows no bounds. Logic is always the greatest victim. Tulip Mania taught us this. If the value of something is determined not by the utility it provides, but by how much others are willing to pay for it, that thing is not an asset, it is an illusion. History repeats itself because human psychology never changes. By 1929, everyone in the gleaming buildings of Wall Street thought they were getting rich. People were taking out loans and rushing to the stock market, believing without any fundamental analysis that the bull market would last forever. When the market collapsed on Black Thursday, it wasn't just a stock index that disappeared. It was the dreams of a generation. That day, the crowd in front of the stock exchange building was made up of people who had lost not just their money, but the meaning of their lives. Imagine a clerk working in a small office on Wall Street in those days. Let's call him Arthur. Arthur invested the money he had saved for years into those great iron and steel stocks that his colleagues said would never lose. When the news broke, the value of the stocks had eroded by 90%. Arthur was left with nothing but unemployment and accumulated bills. It wasn't just Arthur who jumped out of a window that night. Thousands of Arthurs, thousands of dreams, and thousands of lives drifted down from those windows that day. People were jumping because what they lost wasn't just their money, but the identity they possessed. The panic that occurred that day revealed how fragile the modern financial system was for the first time in all its nakedness. The Great Depression that followed was a decade where millions faced hunger and uncertainty. People formed long lines in front of banks, waiting for hours to get their money back. But the doors remained locked from the inside. Banks weren't closing because they had run out of cash, but because they had run out of trust. So, did we learn our lesson after all this experience? In the famous crisis of 2008, There were no people jumping from buildings this time, but when Lehman Brothers collapsed, the veins of the entire world economy stopped for a moment. 2008 is a story of banks falling like a giant domino, where the system destroyed itself. At the root of the mortgage crisis, just like in the tulip craze, there were overvalued assets and a blind trust in those assets. Bankers packaged risky loans and sold them as safe. In the late 1920s, people were buying stocks they said would never collapse. And in 2008, people trusted real estate prices they said would never fall. In that era, if you went to a real estate agency, you would see that even people with no income could get a home loan. As banks took these loans and sold them to others, the risk grew even larger. The result, a global erosion of trust and giant institutions labeled too big to fail that governments were forced to bail out. That crisis showed us that when those at the top of the system make mistakes, the ordinary citizen pays the price. The lost jobs, the emptied homes, and the shattered families during that period were actually the real face of the crisis beyond the numbers. But what is truly frightening is that the system can collapse not from an external attack, but from mistakes originating from within. Remember the example of Nick Leeson? How did a single trader bury a 200-year-old bank in history by hiding a wrong account? Leeson thought he was managing the risk of the entire bank on his own in his Singapore office. He made a mistake and lost. But instead of admitting it, he hid the loss in an account. He numbered that account 88,888, as if playing a game of chance. He tried to compensate for every failed move with a larger risk. The secret account he opened to hide his mistakes was actually the place where he dug the grave of the bank. Every morning when Leeson sat at his desk, he believed the world markets were conspiring against him. But in reality, he was getting lost in the labyrinth of his own lies. This event showed how fragile financial institutions are and how easily control mechanisms can be manipulated. But Leeson wasn't alone. People like Jerome Kervill were also preparing their own ends by using the loopholes of the system while risking billions of dollars on their own. Even though these rogue traders are the darkest figures in the financial world, they were actually mirrors showing us the hidden cracks within the system. We can read from these examples how long an institution can turn a blind eye to someone who brings in profit but breaks the rules, and how the institutional culture rots. This decay is not limited to banks. Berne Madoff S. Ponzi scheme proves how even the people at the very top of the system can deceive others. For years, Madoff promised his investors stable profits. People thought their money was in safe hands. However, that money was actually being invested nowhere. Madoff was keeping the system afloat by distributing the money he received from new investors to the old ones. It was a massive mathematical illusion. When Madoff was arrested, not only did the investors lose their money, but the faith in the financial system had collapsed as well. Today, the situation is much more complex. It is no longer people like Nick Leeson who manage the markets, but algorithms that execute millions of trades in milliseconds. When a flash crash occurs, the system can lock up in seconds. Think about that famous 36 minutes in 2010. The market suddenly plummeted. The value of companies hit zero in seconds. Then it returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Without any human intervention, machines sold to one another and drove the system to the brink. That moment in 2010 is one of the greatest mysteries in financial history. Nobody fully understood what happened. We only knew that the machines had panicked. A cyberattack or a software glitch can stop everything from the food supply chain to energy lines in an instant. The digitalized world gives us speed, but it also leaves us vulnerable to the smallest error. In the world of high-frequency trading (HFT), humans are no longer decision makers, but mere spectators. Within such a complex system, the slightest black swan event or an unpredictable data deviation can destroy this structure built like a house of cards. Have you ever wondered if the money in your bank account is actually just a number on a screen? If that number were to be erased, it would affect not just the bank, but your entire way of life. So, is this transparency that comes with digitalization truly reliable? No, quite the opposite. Misinformation is now part of finance. Fake news, manipulations on social media, and bot accounts can increase or decrease stock prices by 20% in seconds. Today, it is almost impossible to distinguish whether the data an investor sees as real or an algorithmic game staged to steer the market. Finance is not just money, but society's trust in the future. History has proven time and again that this trust can vanish when you wake up one morning. From the tulips of the 17th century to today's complex algorithms, the only thing that has changed is the instruments used. Greed, fear, and the desire to believe blindly have remained the same. The greatest paradox at the heart of modern finance is this: the more complex the system becomes, the safer it appears, but in reality, it becomes more fragile. In today's world, nothing is actually as solid as it seems. In an age where the flow of information is this rapid, it is much harder to distinguish what is real and what is an illusion. That is exactly why financial literacy is not a luxury, but a survival skill. Before the next crisis arrives, you must understand that the system consists of nothing more than numbers, and that the ground it is built upon is incredibly slippery, because history remembers not just those who learn lessons, but also those who do not. The world economy can stop with the push of a button. So, will you be under the rubble when that button is pushed, or will you be prepared enough to walk away? Only time will tell. Every rise is inevitably followed by a collapse. This is an immutable law of the economic world. Remember that great financial catastrophes always begin with the sentence, "This time it will be different." But history shows us that nothing is different. Only the players and the stages change. Now, look one last time at your own financial world. Beyond those digital numbers, because perhaps the system is cracking even as we speak, as you watch this video. True financial literacy is not reading the numbers, but feeling the human stories behind them and the invisible fragilities of the system. Perhaps the next great crisis is at the door, and the question is no longer will it collapse, but when and how will it happen. Those who are prepared will be the ones who rise from the ashes instead of remaining under the rubble. Remember, your greatest asset is not just your money, but your ability to foresee a crisis. History proves that those who develop this ability survive even in the midst of chaos. Now, the decision is yours. Will you just watch this system, or will you understand the rules of this system and build your own security? The end of the game is clear. The rules have never changed. Only the stage has grown. Be careful, because financial apocalypse actually always starts on those quiet Tuesday mornings when you feel the safest. If you are ready to see the truth, subscribe to Echoes of Finance and don't just wait for the system's next move. Anticipate it.